Welcome everyone. Some of you may have heard the story of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia. Probably heard at least how they found her body, very gruesome crime scene. And you may have seen some of the documentaries or TV shows that have talked about her murder and who may have done it and things like that. But how many of you know that she spent the last month of her life living in San Diego? Or hiding out in San Diego, as some prefer. So today we're going to go trace her route in San Diego and show you the places she was at and just tell that story. So let's go. Do you know the Black Dahlia? Do you know the whole story? Stay tuned. So in early December 1946, Elizabeth Short was worried about something. She seemed scared. She was crying at times, and most of her friends had noticed this. And on December 6, 1946, Elizabeth Short went to lunch at the Brown Derby in Hollywood with her friend Ann Toth, probably her best friend at the time. And the purpose of that lunch with her friend Ann was so Elizabeth could ask Ann for some money. And she told Ann at the Brown Derby that her Navy boyfriend told her that if she was able to get to San Diego, he would get her a job at the Naval Hospital. And this is the old Naval Hospital in Balboa Park. The new hospital's built behind this down in Florida Canyon, but this is the old Naval Hospital. So Ann gave Elizabeth $20, and that was the end of the lunch. So Elizabeth Short had a habit of wearing all black, which was very unusual for the time. I mean, not so much nowadays. I mean, nowadays she'd probably be called a goth, but at the time it was very unusual. And she also asked that her friends call her Black Dahlia. And that was a play on words because Elizabeth Short's favorite movie was a movie called The Blue Dahlia. So on the evening of December 6th, after her lunch with Ann Toth at the Brown Derby, a guy by the name of Carl Balsiger picked Elizabeth up and drove her to Camarillo. And they spent the night there, and then they spent the day of December 7th together walking around Camarillo and just seeing some sights. And then they headed back to Los Angeles. Balsinger rented a room in Hollywood for the two of them, and then the next morning, December 8th, he drove her to the downtown bus station in Los Angeles. And she told him she was headed to Berkeley to visit her sister. So Elizabeth Short got on the bus on Sunday, December 8th in downtown Los Angeles, and she got off the bus here in downtown San Diego. And this was the Pickwick Hotel at the time. It's now the Sophia Hotel, but at the time it was a Pickwick Hotel. In this bottom corner of the hotel here was the bus depot. Now, depending on which bus Elizabeth took, if she took the regular bus, it would have taken about 3 hours to get down here. If she took the express, it would have taken 2. But either way, this was her destination, San Diego, California. So at the time, the buses would have pulled into the back of the Pickwick Hotel here through this archway, and you can see in this old photo they're dismantling the archway, but that's what it used to look like, and the buses would come through. And where this overhang is here, the buses would pull in there and offload the passengers and luggage and whatnot, and then they would go inside to the bus terminal. And inside the terminal there was, a lunch counter and, waiting area, benches and things for people to sit and either wait for their bus or wait for people to show up. But Elizabeth came in and she went into the bus terminal and she got a stool at the counter, the lunch counter, and started making some small talk with the people working there. Then she went and she checked her bags. You know, she had I believe she had like 2 bags and a makeup kit and all that. So she went and checked those at the bus terminal, and then came back to the counter and started reading the newspaper, trying to find something to do. She didn't know anybody down here. She didn't have anything to do. This was just an escape, basically. So started looking at the newspaper, and she ended up looking at the movie ads for the time, and she looked at all the different theaters and what was playing, and she ended up finding a movie she wanted to see, and it was playing at the Aztec Theater on 5th Avenue. So Elizabeth made her way from the bus depot at the Pickwick Hotel, and she probably would have gone down Broadway, headed to 5th Avenue, and then when she got to 5th Avenue, she would have gone down 5th Avenue to the corner of 5th and G, where the Aztec Theater was. So at the corner of 5th and G, this was the Aztec Theater. And that night, the Aztec Theater was playing Elizabeth Short's favorite movie, The Blue Dahlia. So she would have gone through those doors down there. It was configured a little different, but she would have bought a ticket from the gal at the ticket window, and she went in to watch her movie. Now, at some point, she ended up falling asleep in her seat. And at the end of the night, 21-year-old Dorothy French, the theater cashier, woke the Black Dahlia up and told her it was time to go. And Elizabeth told Dorothy a tale of woe about her travels, missing different connections or missing her friends, all that kind of thing. So Dorothy offered to take Elizabeth home with her to the 2-bedroom house she shared with her mom and younger brother, where Elizabeth could stay for a night or two. The house was at 2750 Camino Pradero in the Bayview Terrace housing project in Pacific Beach, which was government housing. So you had to be a government employee to live there. Now, Dorothy French's mother, she was a widow. She actually worked at the Naval Hospital. So we are at Pico and Garnett, and as you can see from this map from back in the day, back in the 40s and 50s, this portion of Garnett was actually still Balboa, and Pico did not go all the way through up to the top of the hill as it does today. So we are at the top of Pico, and somewhere in here, this is the intersection of Bluffside and Pico, and this is Haskell and Pico. Somewhere in here is where Camino Pradero was. Now, back in the 40s and 50s, this was government housing. So government employees could live here. And then they tore all that down, realigned the streets, and this is now military housing. But right in here somewhere would have been Camino Pradero. So what was supposed to be a couple weeks of staying at the French home turned into weeks. And Elizabeth would sleep until noon. She never got a job, and most days after she got up, she would just lounge around the house until it was time to go out, and then she would dress up all in black and hit the town. The Frenches would have to tiptoe around the house so they didn't wake her up. Now, Elizabeth wrote a lot of letters, some of which she mailed, some which she didn't. She wrote to her mom that she was working, at one time she was working at the Red Cross, another time she was working at the VA hospital. To some other people, she wrote that she was working at the Naval Hospital, which, remember, Mrs. French is the one that was working at the Naval Hospital, not Elizabeth. And there's no record that she even ever applied there. In fact, there's no indication that she even applied for any job while she was living here in San Diego. So on either December 15th or 16th, 1946, a hardware salesman by the name of Red Manley was in the area here of 3rd Avenue and Broadway in downtown San Diego. And he saw Elizabeth Short standing here at the corner of 3rd and Broadway, and he pulled his car over and asked for directions. And he offered her a ride. Now, if you saw our video on Frank Bompensiero, you know that the bars that were right along in here at 3rd and Broadway and all up 3rd right there, the handful of bars and establishments, they were controlled by the Los Angeles mob. And these bars also catered to a lot of Navy personnel at the time. So Red Manley drives Elizabeth back to the French's house in Pacific Beach, and he asked for a date for later that night. So Elizabeth told the French's she had had a job for an airline office job, but instead she was picked up by Red Manley and brought home. Now, this area right here, 3rd and Broadway, is very close to the bus depot and the Pickwick Hotel, which is right down there, about 2 blocks away. So she ended up having dates with Red Manley every day from December 17th through the 20th. And during this time, she told Red Manley that she worked in an airline office. Now, Red Manley had red hair, and that was his nickname, Red. So Robert Red Manley is what he went by. So Manley booked a motel room for 2, and then he went and picked up Elizabeth Short at the French's house. And then he drove over here to the 3500 block of El Cajon Boulevard to a place called Harry's Cafe, which is no longer here. However, I think he probably knew about it from his salesman route. But he went inside Harry's Cafe, not the same Harry's Cafe as the one in La Jolla, been there forever, different one. But he went inside Harry's Cafe and asked the employees, where's a good place for fine dining and dancing? And they told him the Hacienda Cafe at 47th and University, so not too far away. So this is 47th and University, and the Hacienda Cafe was actually at 4693 University, which would have been where this Pronto Laundry is right now. So when Red Manley and Elizabeth Short got to the Hacienda Cafe, they got there too late to eat. The kitchen was closed. So they had a few drinks, and then they ended up going to a drive-in down the street and got some food. And then Elizabeth asked Manley to take her home to the French's, and he asked if he could see her again, and she said to send a telegram next time he came into town on one of his sales trips. So Elizabeth would go out just about every night, mostly back to downtown San Diego. Some nights she would take the bus with Dorothy French when she went to work at the Aztec, and Elizabeth would then meet her after her shift and take the bus with her back to Pacific Beach. Elizabeth would meet various guys, some in the Navy, some salesmen and other jobs. She would borrow money to eat, she would accept rides from strangers, and she had a date almost every single night. So one of those dates was with a guy by the name of Sam Navarra. Now this is the 2500 block of Columbia, and Sam Navarra lived at 2416 Columbia, which would have been right up in here where the freeway is now. So on their first date after a movie, Sam Navarra escorted Elizabeth Short back to Pacific Beach to the French's home. So on Christmas Eve, the girls took the bus downtown so Dorothy could go to work here at the Aztec Theater and Elizabeth could hang out. While here, Elizabeth was approached by a man named Frank Dominguez, and they started a conversation. And then Elizabeth leaned over to Dorothy and said the man asked her to have dinner with him at his house that night. So Elizabeth didn't get back to the French's until later the next day, Christmas Day. She had Christmas dinner with the French's that night, and then the next day, December 26th, Elizabeth had a date with Red Manley. Then on December 27th, Elizabeth had a date with an unknown male who sat outside the French's home and honked his horn for her to come out. So on New Year's Eve, Elizabeth had another date with Frank Dominguez, and he took her to the El Cajon Club, which was here at 4017 El Cajon Boulevard, which would have been right about here where this off-ramp is from Interstate 15. So Elizabeth ended up drinking too much, and according to the bartender, Dominguez was slapping her around. However, he could have been slapping her to try and sober her up, but either way, Dominguez ended up putting her in the car, and he left her at the doorstep of the French's home in Pacific Beach. Now on January 2nd, 1947, Elizabeth sent a telegram to Ann Toth and asked for some money. And it's believed that Ann Toth did send her the money, although I don't know how much. Then on January 7th, 1947, two men and a woman showed up at the French's front door asking for Elizabeth, and she refused to go to the door or talk to the people, and this really shook her up pretty bad. After that happened on January 7th, the French's and Elizabeth had a talk, and the French's expressed to her they were tired of her basically overstaying her welcome, and that she never helped with groceries. In fact, they reminded her that on December 22nd, 1946, she had received a wire of $100, and she didn't bother helping to pay for groceries or anything like that. So they asked her to leave. So Elizabeth, because it was later in the day, Elizabeth asked if she could stay one more night, and they agreed, one more night. Well, that night, on January 7th, she went out on a date with Sam Navarra. And he told police later that he dropped her back at the French's that same night, January 7th. And Elizabeth had told him she was heading to Massachusetts the next day. Now on January 8th, 1947, Red Manley came back into town, and he had sent her a telegram prior and told her he was coming down on another sales trip, and he made arrangements to meet with Elizabeth in downtown San Diego at 4 p.m. on January 8th. So Manley goes to downtown San Diego to the meetup spot, and she's not there. So he drives back up here to Camino Pradero, and Elizabeth was waiting here with her bags all packed. And she told him she needed to get back to LA as soon as possible. So Manley suggested they wait until morning because it's now later in the evening and it's a long drive. So he suggested they wait until morning, and she said okay. So he got a motel room for them, and then he suggested they try the Hacienda Cafe again. Well, Elizabeth said since this was her last night in town, she would like to go to the U.S. Grant for dinner and dancing. So they got to the Grant Hotel and went inside, and there was a band playing, but no one was dancing. So they ordered drinks, but to Robert Manley it seemed like Elizabeth was getting really moody, and she kept looking at the door like she was expecting someone to come through. And Manley thought maybe she was hoping to see someone that she knew. So Red Manley and Elizabeth left the Grant, and they came over to where the Hacienda Cafe used to be, here at 4693 University. And they drank and they danced, and Elizabeth's mood got a lot better. So they left the Hacienda and stopped at a drive-in, got some hamburgers, and then went to the motel to eat. So Elizabeth changed into a sweater and she pushed the sleeves up, and Red Manley saw that she had scratch marks all over her arms. She said she had a jealous boyfriend. So nothing happened between Red Manley and Elizabeth that night. And according to Manley, he slept in the bed and she slept in a chair. So the next day, January 9th, 1947, Red Manley had an early morning appointment, and then he returned to the motel to pick up Elizabeth around 12:30. So Manley and Elizabeth may have stopped at Sheldon's Sandwich Shop as they started the drive. So we are at Garnett and Mission Bay Drive. Back in the day, this was Balboa and Pacific Highway. And Pacific Highway ran all the way from downtown San Diego all the way up here and took you all the way up to Los Angeles. And at 4711 was Sheldon's Sandwich Shop, where this McDonald's is now. And sometimes in the late afternoon, Elizabeth Short would come to Sheldon's Sandwich Shop and hang out, maybe read the newspaper a little bit, and make some collect phone calls on their phone here. And next to Sheldon's Sandwich Shop, there was a gas station, which there still is today. They did for sure stop in Laguna Beach for gas and to stretch their legs. Then when they got to LA, Elizabeth asked to go to the bus station downtown, where she checked some of her bags into a locker. But Robert Manley didn't want to leave her in that area alone, so she then suggested the Biltmore Hotel, where she would sit and wait for her sister, which was a lie to get rid of Manley. Around 6:30 p.m., Manley took her into the Biltmore, helped her into the lobby with the belongings that she didn't check at the bus station, and then he waited with her for a couple hours. The sister hadn't shown up, and Manley had to go, so he left her in the lobby, and he never saw her again. Unbeknownst to Red Manley, Elizabeth walked out of the Biltmore lobby after he left, and she walked into the LA night. So here's the graphic parts. So get the kids out of the room or bring them in, whatever. So in the early morning hours of January 15, 1947, in the 3800 block of Norton Avenue, a passerby found Elizabeth Short's nude body in a vacant field. Now there's now houses all built in that area, but the house at 3825 Norton Avenue is built on the spot where Elizabeth's body was found. So her body had been cut in two. She had multiple minute stab wounds all over her body. Her face had been sliced from ear to ear, like a very gruesome smile kind of a thing. Her body had been drained of all her blood. Her body had been washed. Her hair had been washed. And that's what the police were left with to try and figure out. So on January 16, 1947, the Los Angeles Police Department requested the San Diego Police Department to assist in the investigation of Elizabeth Short's murder. So their job was to go all around San Diego and try and track all her whereabouts and the various contacts she had throughout the 4 weeks that she was here. So the detectives in charge of that would have been dispatched from this building here, which is the old San Diego Police Headquarters. So they would have interviewed the Frenches, the dates that they could find, the employees at Sheldon's Sandwich Shop and the gas station next door, and anything else they could track down, the motels that she had went to, the various restaurants, things like that. So Robert Red Manley was initially arrested for the murder of Elizabeth Short. It ended up he had an airtight alibi for the time that she was murdered, so they released him, and about 10 days after her body was found, they found a number of Elizabeth's belongings in a dumpster in downtown Los Angeles. So Red Manley assisted the police in going through her belongings and helping identify what was hers. And to this day, the case is still unsolved. There's a lot of theories out there. There's a lot of possibilities of who done it. You can research all those and look at the various documentaries and TV programs, but the case is still unsolved today. So that's going to do it, ladies and gentlemen, for our story about Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and the 4 weeks she spent living here in San Diego, hiding out maybe, on the run. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time on Discover This.